Hello. Welcome back, everyone, to Disasters Deconstructed. Hey, Ksenia.
Yeah, we're back. I've missed the music. It's been ages, so I've been humming, humming along. Oh, it's so great to be back. Super
Hopefully,
excited.
a little bit of dancing, like me in my office.
Always dancing in the office. And we're back with season 10. Season 10, Jason, season 10.
We're
Oh, we're
still,
still standing.
we're still here. I wonder. Some people might have thought we've packed it in, but never.
Never. No, like we promised, right? In season one that we'll do this until we drop that. So far so good. Um, 6
Absolutely.
years in, there's we tested my math now. Still standing strong, but yeah, a bit of a gap, a bit of chaos. But it's really nice to be back. And season 10 was season 9, sorry, was slightly different. For those of you who are following us, we kind of did the two stories from two different locations, and the episodes, of course, were created by the researchers themselves who are doing the research. So if you haven't listened to season 9 yet, please listen to it. The stories are great, one from the UK, one from Nepal. It's just been, it's something that we kind of wanted to do, right? So it was super exciting to actually to be
Yeah, it
able
was.
to do that,
Yeah, it
right?
was definitely something different, and I think as we go on, if we have opportunities to bring in like those local stories, it's definitely a priority. And yeah, if anybody has ideas for like future seasons, just reach out to us. We'd love to do more things like we did last season too. But we're also really excited about season 10 because it's like aligned with a project that we're working on that's close to our hearts. So Ksenia, you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, and we're just kind of, season 9 was all like voices from the ground, and season 10 we're back on our theoretical intellectual horse with a wink to, to the poster that we're using today.
Yes,
So,
sort of is, yeah.
right. Over the kind of past like year, I guess, year and a half, so Jason, whilst we were not too busy with podcasts, like we were still talking about things. And one of the things, I mean, for those of you who kind of have been following our work, you know that we're really inspired in our disaster scholarship and our thinking by writings and thinkings and kind of art of the people who are not disaster scholars at all, right? Like we kind of, get inspired from fiction to critical theory, you name it. We've kind of covered it in previous seasons. And so what we started doing with Jason, and thanks to like lots of friends and comrades and scholars all around the world, we started putting together a volume. It's not kind of quite real yet, but hopefully it will be real soon. Which originally was called a really cheesy name, 100 Thinkers,
Yeah.
but now Jason improved it dramatically by renaming it Contemplating Catastrophe. So basically, what we invited our like friends and our colleagues to do is to write us an essay about a thinker that whose work they really engage with, and we made it quite clear that we do not want any of the thinkers to be disaster scholars. As great as their work is, as important as their work is, we really wanted to get people to think outside of the box and to engage with literature, with theory, with philosophy, with kind of whatever it is they want to engage with, and to write about people that definitely have or should influence our thinking in disaster scholarship and practice, but maybe other people are not aware of at all. So it's been super exciting. Like last year, we've been reading and editing the essays that we've been getting. So we're now, I think, at 88 or 86, kind of nearly 90, not quite 100, but I think we've kind of given up on on my terrible 100 number. It just looks good, right? So yeah, so watch the space. We have really exciting plans for this kind of selection of essays. But this season 10 is going to be built around the thinkers and around the entries that we have been getting through the year. And so through the season, we will be talking to people who have kindly written these essays for us. So yeah, it's going to be super fun, right?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I want to talk a bit about just the structure of the year. And then we want to bring in some special guests for you today to talk about the season and introduce it. What we're planning is a live stream every 3 weeks up and through May, to get us like halfway through our kind of idea of themes, you know, in the project of these 80 some essays. And by the way, I love the way you say essay. I need to start saying essay instead of
How
essay.
do you say it? Essay.
I say essay, yeah. Anyhow, I like how you say it better. Just by the way.
You just completely blown my mind, but yeah, sure. Okay, let's go.
So we're gonna get
welcome back to Disasters Deconstructed. None of the conversations make any sense.
In any case, we'll get up through May, about halfway through the season, and then we want you all to take a reading break for the summer, and hopefully we'll have like some suggestions. Maybe we can all read together a few things.
Yes, please.
Are you still enjoying the essay thing?
I'm gonna, for the rest of this episode, I'm just gonna like giggle quietly to myself. Don't mind me. You know.
And then after the reading break, hopefully we can read some things together. We'll come back in September for another, you know, series of live streams every 3 weeks through the conclusion. I hope, honestly, by the time we reach the end of the season, you know, everything's published. Like, that would be my hope. All the essays are published. We're really working on it.
Sure. Yeah.
We really do appreciate everybody's contributions. They're incredible. Like, it's been so much fun to read and comment on all these essays. And so the way we've structured the season is, you know, an introduction and conclusion episodes, but in between, we've tried to look at key areas of thought and try to set up some shows with some of the authors that have contributed to exploring those areas of thought. So we have episodes on feminism, urbanism, anarchism, Black Power, Latin American and the Caribbean, intellectual movements in Japan and China, Philippines, and Eastern philosophical traditions. I think that's kind of the scope that we're thinking right now. This could change a little bit, but I think that kind of captures the main areas of thought. So we're excited about this, and thank you all for like joining us for the season.
Yeah, it'll be great. And we thought we would start the season with with two of our really good friends, our comrades. And so these two people were basically the first people who actually discussed the idea of this, 100 Thinkers volume. And they both encouraged us. So if you really think that this is a terrible idea, you can blame them as much as you blame us. So it is our absolute pleasure to host today JC Gaillard and AJ Fazz, who I don't think need any introduction. You all know them really, really well. And also they have both written not one, but two entries for our volume because we volunteered them to do so. That's how it works. How, JC? Hi, JC. Hi, AJ. This is it. I've started swapping names now. Here we go.
Welcome.
Welcome. Great to have you back. Thank you for joining us. AJ, second time?
This is my second time. Yeah, I'm nowhere near the number of appearances that JC has made, but I'm really. I mean, this is now that I just wrote in here today. This is one of my favorite places to hang out, and so I'm super happy to be here and to be invited. And I like that it's JC and I together in the same space, so at least some people can now realize that we're not the same person.
Not the same person. But Jason, I also feel like we should have, just like, okay, you'll have to use 3 letters. There's kind of no escape. I could have used my normal, that I signed with. So we just all use consonants, for our names.
That's I can still change
alphabet soup episode. Yeah.
The whole point of today's discussion is to brainstorm why AJ uses full stops in his initials and why I don't. Right? That's the purpose of the.
And that is the existential question.
Yes, indeed.
We've been all trying to answer.
It's the hazard of the vowel, so you don't have to deal with the vowel. If I don't use the full stops, then I get Aj, and then I get addressed as Aj Faas.
That's a very good point.
Okay, now that we're clear on that, shall we talk about
We tackle all the hard issues right up front.
Which has made my day, basically, because now I have an answer.
You've been wondering for years.
When people ask me why I don't use full stops, then I don't have a vowel. That's an answer.
Perfect.
the hyphen? No,
Sorry?
your name has a hyphen, like the full name.
Yeah, but forget about the hyphen. It's too much.
Okay, Jason, please move us on. Otherwise, we will be here for an hour.
No banter, you said. No banter.
Yeah, no banter.
Never.
Not
No
at all.
banter.
We never do that on this podcast.
We're really serious. Serious
okay.
establishment. Look at us.
So let's move on to talk about the horse picture. No, just kidding.
As we should.
Well, yeah, I don't know if anybody caught the reference to AJ writing into this session, but you may have seen the poster for the session with the horse picture. And we received this picture a while ago, and we just
From AJ. Can I just make it clear
yes.
that we didn't? Yeah, we haven't received it from the source, or the original source.
I love it. I love this horse picture. So much
It's
fun.
the
I
best.
just can't match it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jesse. You'll have to try really hard, you know.
I promise
All
I'll
right.
try. It's something that matches that.
Yeah, you gotta add to it. Okay, so let's talk about this kind of core. The reason we had this idea in the first place, like something we talk about pretty much in every season, I think, or every time we are in conversation, I think, Ksenia, like reading outside of our like disaster studies, outside of our field, reading across different areas of knowledge and the importance of it. So the whole point of this volume that we've been working on of essays was to get people to engage with perspectives that they might not be familiar with, right? So I wanted to start with you, AJ, just kind of ask you how you kind of think about that idea of people engaging with perspectives they're not familiar with. And then maybe just personally, like, what do you love to read? How did you get into reading that stuff that you're reading? Yeah, what's your process of finding things to challenge you intellectually?
Well, thank you for that question, and I just want to say thanks again for having me. I'm not just being funny that when I say that this is one of my favorite places to hang out, and the three of you are some of my favorite people to hang out with. So it's really a lot of fun to be here. And now, what do I read? How have I gotten started reading different things? I mean, I could set off wildly in every direction to try and answer that question. But I think the first part of the question about like sort of engaging with perspectives we're not familiar with, I mean, I think that this project of this book that is the topic of this season, I think the project and its objectives are really terrific. No matter the field, I think that the settling of thought is boring at best, right? And violent and totalitarian at worst. And so I also think that sort of one of the most important, I don't know, what you might call meta functions of the arts, of sciences, of humanities, is to keep thought lively and in play. And so long as we're discussing disasters, as I believe we're meant to do here, I think that there are real opportunities to disrupt some seemingly settled figurations of thought and to set off in new directions. As for what I read, I quite honestly, I read everything. I recently, in a conversation with my wife, I said something like, I pointed out that she reads a lot of biographies and I don't. And then, so as soon as I finished saying that, I rattled off a list of like 35 biographies that I'd read. And I was like, I guess I do. I've got a constant rotation of mostly philosophy, fiction, poetry, art, history. I do also read social science as part of my job. But you name it, I really do read very actively, and I devote a lot of time to it. Sometimes I pick something up because of a recommendation. I was in a conversation recently with the great Beth Marino, and she told me that Candace Callison's How Climate Change Comes to Matter was her favorite ethnography of climate change. And so like coming from her, I knew that meant that like I had to read it. And that happens in conversations all the time. I've been turned on to things on this very podcast, which first got me reading Viola Jacobs' important work after her appearance on the podcast. And then I can name several other examples, both in your written work and what I come across here in the podcast. Sometimes things just come up repeatedly as references in whatever I'm reading, and that could be literary too, literary allusions and whatnot. I'm occasionally methodical, as when I take like a deep dive, which I'm doing another one right now, a deep dive on like the history of liberalism. I'm in my fourth wave of deep dives on the concept of nature. But usually I'm really jumping back and forth, I think, between older and newer texts across every genre, it's not only just sort of fun, it often results in all kinds of sort of serendipitous hybrid connections in my thought between, say, literature and philosophy and anthropology or what have you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And JC, I want to ask you kind of the same question. How do you approach this question of the importance of like reading broadly, and what's your passion? How did you get to it?
Thanks, Jason. I think if there's one commonality with what AJ said, would be probably eclecticism. I like to read very diverse stuff, probably more academic than AJ, because I think you've got a wider range than I have. But I think to me, if I'm trying to think of why I've started to read first and foremost beyond disaster studies, is what I call my frustration with the field, I think, which came out of practice more than academia, and how I couldn't find at some point, I think maybe 10 to 15 years ago, I couldn't find the answers to the challenges I was facing in the field as a practitioner. I couldn't find the answers to the issues I was facing, and I had to go beyond disaster studies to engage with some more, I'm not sure if it's more insightful, but at least some literature that was bringing me more or new ideas. And that's how I started to read Foucault, for example, kind of 13, 14 years ago, and opening up into a whole range of new critical theory thinkers. But yeah, I would say that I read first and foremost stuff outside of disaster studies. Although I'm super excited about my latest acquisition, that it's on top of my reading list now. I just got it 2 days ago.
Finally.
I love that book.
It's great. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
That's perfect timing. But
is it signed? That's the question.
It's a sign, yeah.
Because I have a signed copy.
No.
Shocking. Okay, I win.
No, enough self-promotion. But yeah, no, I would read I think on my desk at the moment at home, I've got some stuff on Orientalism in the arts. I've got stuff from Asian critical thinkers, not very well known in the West. I've got stuff by Foucault, I think, and I've got a few other stuff from Philippine studies, in English and in Filipino as well. So I think yeah, it's more about being curious, and I think disaster studies provides a sort of nice platform for engaging with diverse eclectic literature, because you can touch upon so many different things. And over the past 15 years, I mean, I got into the literature on gender, on arts, on disability, on I mean, all sorts of philosophical schools of thought, because I mean, I needed to, because of the things I was encountering in the field. So I think our field is very well placed to stimulate that kind of engagement with diverse sets of literature.
That gives me a really nice segue to kind of to my next question, and I'll start with you, JC. Kind of, I'll continue with you. You know, for both of you, for you, AJ, and for you, JC, your scholarship's kind of very much outside of the like normative disaster studies, you know, disaster scholarship, and you both have really been pushing the boundaries of how we kind of do disaster studies, how we think about various concepts and various practices. So what inspires you and your work, you know? And you kind of, JC, you started alluding a little bit to this, but like, can you tell us a little bit more about your inspirations? Like, why do you care so much?
But I think when I was trying to impose such normative concepts as vulnerability, capacities, etc., within very standardized framework for reducing the risk of disasters, or what we call reducing the risk of disasters. I mean, I was not getting the response I was expecting from the people I was working with, because the concept just didn't make sense. And I had to understand why these concepts didn't make sense. And I used to be very much enclosed into my disaster studies silo back in the 2000s, for example. And I realized that I had to go beyond that if I wanted to understand why, because the literature on disasters was kind of going in circle. And I had to go beyond that. I had to. So first, I returned to the classics of the 1970s, our own kind of mentors, who, by the way, used to cite and refer to thinkers much beyond disaster studies. And actually, if you look at what Ben Wisner, Phil O'Keefe, and all these guys were citing in the 1970s, there were very, very few stuff that we would label disaster studies nowadays. And the first turning point, I mean, critical theory back then was how they managed to change the field by introducing the concept of vulnerability as a prompt, not as a silver bullet meant to be rolled out all over the world. So it was that kind of looking back at what they did and how they came up with something new back then, was kind of an inspiration for reading outside of the field. At the time, they were obviously reading a lot of Marxist stuff, either orthodox or less orthodox. I mean, they were reading a lot of Althusser, Balibar, and those kind of things as well in the 1970s. But I mean, that was a kind of source of inspiration back then for me. And I mean, back then, it's kind of 13 years ago.
Super, thanks, JC. AJ, same question to you. You know, why are you trying to challenge us all and, you know, make us think? It could be so easy, right?
Well, I want to begin with a commercial. one of my favorite recent books. J.C. Gaillard,
Oh my
The
God, I
Invention
don't
of Disaster.
ever had so much flattery in one
Which
episode.
was
This is
really,
great.
really interesting, and I think it is relevant to how I'd like to answer this question, because while JC and I know each other, never in person though, only on paper
Never met.
and virtual spaces, we know each other. We've known each other's work for quite some time. His book came out just as I was finishing my last book, so I think it was the two of you, Jason and Ksenia, who pointed out some of the sort of parallel directions that we had gone into in our work, independently of one another. But I think we had very sort of similar experiences. I really relate a lot with what JC just said, because I'd say that I'm inspired by thinking with others, and I think that preposition of with is really important, of thinking with worlds like unfolding around myself and others. And so I made a bit of an issue in my last book about the core disasters argument, which is really sort of an older political ecological argument about no natural disasters, and I continue to try and trouble this in my work, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I think it's a really important argument that really belongs in our conversation, but much like JC, like my first problem was that it doesn't really play very well with a lot of others, such as my friends in Penipe, who regard the volcano Tungurahua as grandmother and recognize a range of kinship relations with the landscape and other species that, very much in society that might otherwise be relegated to, quote unquote, nature. So I'm concerned that this argument really leaves the nature-culture binary of the Enlightenment and even the anti-Enlightenment sort of romanticism wholly undisturbed. So what inspires me is thought and praxis that like disrupts these and other related conventions of thought and the types of relationalities that they engender. Like, I don't want some rigid argument for like what is, nor some totalitarian imposition of categories and binaries that would silence my friends in Penipe before they ever even have a chance to speak, right? And so I want to think with them about worlds unfolding, coming into being, and to think with them in the species and waters they course across the landscape, to sort of trace their becomings and goings. And so I'm inspired by folks like all of you and others who keep the courses of coming and going like alive, who are deeply curious about the world as much as they are deeply unsettled by power and inequality. Like, how can we take on power and inequality if we restrict ourselves to the terms dictated by these relations, right? Yeah, so I could go on. I'll leave it.
That's great.
Yeah, so I want to move to talk a little bit more about what you both wrote in your essays for this collection, and just sticking with you, AJ. You wrote about Santiago Castro Gómez and Antonio Gramsci. And I know there was actually a bit of a fight about who would get Gramsci. I know Tony Oliver Smith was interested, but you got in there first, AJ. So so why did you come back to us and suggest these thinkers? And as you kind of engaged with their work and kind of came up with these manuscripts for us, what do you think disaster scholars need to know? Like, why should disaster scholars be engaging with their work? What were you hoping readers would kind of get out of that?
Well, excellent question. Impossible to answer in a limited amount of time, but I'll do what I can. Well, I didn't realize that there was so much competition for Gramsci, so apologies, Tony, if you're listening. For what it's worth, I think I lost out on Foucault to JC, but I'm very glad that he's in very capable hands. I imagine there was a lot of competition for those two thinkers. Well, let me start, if I can, with Gramsci, and I think two primary reasons. Well, each of my reasons is like 9 reasons in a trench coat, but the two main reasons that he's really important to me. First is that while I had read plenty of philosophy, Gramsci was the first theorist that I read seriously once I really committed to a career in social science. And this was before I got into sort of the, disaster space. But somewhere around my senior year of undergraduate and my early master's studies, I was certainly starting to read Foucault, Fanon, Bourdieu, and others at the time as well. But as challenging as the prison notebooks are to read, I found Gramsci to be a really good partner for working through some of the most basic problems that affected my thought at the time. Gramsci was, of course, really trying to overcome the sort of structural functionalism of the scientific Marxism that was ascendant at his time, which was just sort of this like billiard ball theory of the world, and to make sense of the formation of like social, cultural, political thought, subjectivity, and praxis in differently assembled capitalist societies, these weird sort of spaces that Italy was at the time, especially. His notion of hegemony as a question, not an answer, about the soft formation of power for me was and remains fascinating. His attention to literature and the arts in a way that didn't dismiss them as somehow like epiphenomenal to material conditions, and his framework of the historical block, all in a way prefigure assemblage thinking, at least how I handle this domain of thought and praxis. And this perpetual sort of becoming of entanglements of multiplicity. And I think it's an important sort of bridging line of thought for students of social science. It wasn't just me, but I see my own students now year after year come into social science looking for something like laws or objective principles governing human behavior and systems, much as I once did. And Gramsci is a sort of an excellent, I think, gateway to thinking beyond such state-like rigidities of thought. I mean, if I could say something succinctly also about Santiago Castro Gómez, very important work. I think he became important for me as a Latin American theorist who worked to conduct critical examinations of the present, and he's inspired quite a bit by Foucault himself, without locating the machinations of power and knowledge outside of Latin America and the global South, and behind the backs of his people, of its people. His genealogical approach to Latin American thought and society, like, really envisions as its object not one logic and system of power driving history, but like many that might be operating at the time of any encounter and which are transformed by encounters. He too wants to think with and not just about. And so I found myself sort of inspired by his abandonment of both historicist and humanist figures of thought, and in favor of attention to particular relations and discourses as sort of ontologically prior to anything like generalizable humanity. I'm taken rather with his skepticism of logocentrism, of Enlightenment concepts of nature and human nature, and again thinking with others from like embedded positions on the peripheries of global systems that are hardly territorialized or coherent.
Super. I mean, so I didn't know about Santiago Castro Gómez before you mentioned his work to us. So I think that's the beauty of this volume, that actually there are quite a few thinkers that both Jason and I were like, oh, like we don't know who those people are. Like, why don't we know? So yeah, so thanks for bringing that, and it's just fantastic, to kind of to really get us all thinking about this work that doesn't quite kind of circulate, I guess, in the disciplines that we are working on. Jesse, same sort of question to you. So you did 2 entries for us, and I remember you and I were sitting in British Library, in fact, and kind of talking about this, right? And I think I asked you to write about Foucault, but you said, I asked you to write about Glissant, and you said I'd rather write about Foucault. But then I bought you another beetroot latte, and you agreed to write about Glissant as well. That's how it, just little bribery goes a long way, isn't it?
Please, no beetroot on this podcast, please. That's an
No,
object of banter.
yeah, that just never gets old. The JC's laugh habitual. But anyhow, also I must mention you were the first person to submit the entry, so I wish I had like a star, but here's the imaginary star. Ta-da! I'll get you
Yeah, but
another.
I'm the last to read that book. So
Yeah, fine. Okay, so the star just kind of got cancelled. But anyway, beetroot latte is on me, or chai, or whatever it is you want as a prize. So
no, I
anyway,
think I remember well. You're suggesting that I would do Gaillard in the first place, and my issue I remember was legitimacy. I wanted someone from the Caribbean to do it. And this is why I wanted Foucault, because I wanted to do a francophone thinker, someone I would be able to read in their original language. And I think for me it was important. I've never read Foucault in English. I'm not sure how it's translated, but yeah, I think to me it was important. That's why I suggested a few people from Southeast Asia as well, especially Salazar, whom I know, and I work with his thoughts quite a lot at the moment, but I don't think I think they are more legitimate people to do Salazar, for example. So I think for me it was somehow a much more pragmatic answer than AJ's fantastic kind of theoretical and inspirational kind of decision. For me, it was really a sort of pragmatic choice. And I knew I didn't want to do Bourdieu. I didn't want to do. I can't do Deleuze. It's too much for me. So I'm not yet there, probably. So yeah, I mean, I think Foucault was an obvious choice in the sense that he was probably one of the first critical thinkers I deeply engaged with for my own work, to inform my own work. And originally the key entry point was the idea of norms, because I was concerned again by how normative our field is and how it doesn't match our experiences in the field. And this, I was trying to find out, why are we so normative? Why are we trying to standardize people's behavior? And Foucault was then an obvious entry point to understand that beyond disaster studies. And then from them, obviously, I mean, it's easy to kind of branch out into his own inspirations. I mean, I love Canguilhem, and I wanted to do Canguilhem as well. I'm not sure if you have Canguilhem in the end.
I don't think we do, actually. So if you want to do a third entry, now is your chance.
Too many French philosophers. I think we need to diversify the entries, and this is why I love the idea at the start. Yeah, so it was an easy way to branch out into so many different things, both francophone and anglophone. But I think that was again a very pragmatic, practical challenge for me that drew me into this more theoretical stuff. And I've come to, so I think I was, and I used to be labeled, and I think I still am labeled a sort of applied geographer by many, with all the baggages it carries, I think, with it. But yeah, I was very much in that space 20 years ago. And I think now I've come to think that without trying to paraphrase Lenin, but I strongly believe that theory liberates practice. And I think the solution to our practical challenges as practitioners, as policymakers, will come from more theory and not more practice-driven or how would you call that, applied objectives in our research. I strongly believe that. I'm not sure how you feel about this, AJ, but to me, the solution is in more theory.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on that. It sounds, it'll definitely sound absurd, I think, to some ears, but I think that, here's another commercial. I mean, my last contribution to the Journal of Disaster Studies was precisely on this topic, right?
Yeah.
and seemingly pure of heart and pure of practice, and theoretically, well, I can't quite say ill-informed. I mean, I was engaged, and then I just didn't realize. I think some of them use the word again, metafunctions, of the types of theory and concepts that I was reading, right? And so I find that I constantly, I have to work through stuff theoretically, and I apologize for it less. I can't say never, but I apologize for it less now than I once did. And I think, I say this all the time to my own students and everything, like, you just need to really realize, like, you'll invoke a key word or a concept, whether it's culture or vulnerability or whatever. And you have to attune yourself to, like, what the multiplicity of meanings that might have when you're in a conversation with any type of a group that has even the slightest bit of diversity to it. And I also think that theory, that concepts can help do the work of solidarity by putting the disparate cases and contexts that we work in, like, in conversation with one another, right? That's why we can have a meaningful conversation in this space right now, even though the particulars are entirely different. So we want to blow up the concepts. We want to place pressure on these concepts at the end of the day when it comes down to actually making sense of real cases and context. But I also think it does the work of solidarity by storying our work together.
But I think our responsibility now probably is to share, whether it's inviting or in such things as podcasts, but it's to share how theories has helped us in changing the way we approach fieldwork, whether it's from an academic perspective or from a practitioner's perspective. I mean, my work with our NGO CDP in the Philippines, for example, or other local partners in the Philippines has changed since I have engaged with critical theory. It has changed, and I hope for the better. So it's not something which is limited to my own kind of office and academic writing. No, it has helped me better deal with very practical problems on the ground. And I think we need to share that, because people need to engage with further theory. And I think we are going in the right direction. The field is going in the right direction, because I've got a special guest in Auckland at the moment, Ricardo Fuente Alba, who many of you know personally. And we had a long chat yesterday with Ricardo about how the new generation of researchers in our field of disaster studies has been informed by the work of critical theorists, and how they are game changers in our field. I said that it was back then a sort of inspiration for me to write The Invention of Disasters, because there was a momentum towards more theory in our field. But these guys, this new generation of early career researchers, they are the game changers, because they started with critical theory. I mean, like you, AJ, but unlike me. So I'm just trying to play catch up, trying to read back what stuff that I should have read back in my undergraduate years back in the 1990s. I mean, you read Gramsci in your senior undergrad years. I read Gramsci 10 years ago, AJ. So I'm playing catch up. But this new generation of researchers is the new hope, because they have that embedded in their own scholarship from the very start. And we need to spread that word. I mean, we need to encourage them. We need to show how this is important and how this has a critical, practical impact.
Yeah, I love that, JC. And we're running at about 10 minutes left. So I want to just bring this back to, like, the fact that we have this collection coming up of essays that have the potential to introduce, students, researchers, people who just like to read about disaster, lots of different people, to different, like, entry points, different ways of thinking about disasters, about risk, about society. So what do you think the potential there is? How can this exposure to all these different entry points change our field, change the field of disaster scholarship. What do you think what is your hope for this kind of work? JC maybe first of all, and then AJ.
I think eclecticism is very important, and it's something super exciting in our field. It's very easy for us to read very diverse stuff, and I personally, I like multitasking. I like doing different things every day. I like reading different things within the same day as well. It's how you take a step back from what you're doing at the same time as learn new things that will inform back this thing you're doing. And I think the more eclecticism, the more diversity in the field. And there are so many other threads of theory that we haven't explored yet in the field. I mean, out of the 88 thinkers you've come up with in the book so far, how many have really been used in our field? Maybe not half of them. And I would say if one of us, one of us, the DD community and the manifesto community at large, we take one thinker and we take it to studying one dimension of what we call disasters. I mean, we may take the field much forward by highlighting things we have possibly not thought of so far.
I think what's so interesting, JC, is that like almost every person who wrote an entry like really is inspired by the thinker that they wrote about. And so yeah, it's like, but if it's like one person in our community that has like really engaged with a thinker and it has inspired disaster scholarship, that doesn't necessarily register for anybody else, maybe except that one researcher, right? So that's the really tricky thing. It's like we are coming from all such different backgrounds and traditions, you know, and so there might be a thinker that has really shaped the thought of one of our colleagues and we don't even know about it, right?
But we need to be curious. We need to be open to new things.
For sure.
And as something we discussed again yesterday with Ricardo, I mean, it's probably easier for us who are a bit later in our career, who can take risk, who can take the time to read a bit more than early career researchers who have to deliver after the expectations of the academia. So we need to create that space for them to be able to read and to be as curious as they want to be, and offer opportunities. And I know Journal of Disaster Studies is trying to do this as well, but I'm not sure all journals would accept a paper framed after, I'm not sure, something Deleuzian or something Salazarian. I think we need to create that space as well for so that they have the opportunity to take the risk, which is not a risk in the end, which is all benefits. It's a win-win for everyone. But sorry, AJ. You go.
No, that was great. I mean, yeah, I'm right with you on all of that. You know, I was just thinking, I started as an undergraduate when I was 22 years old. Proud first-generation college student, but threw myself all the way into it, and was already an avid reader of like philosophy and literature, and you know, I have been reading voraciously thousands of volumes since then. I was 22, and that was 20 years ago, and still, to this day, I'll pick up a volume, I'll read something, and I'll be like, why didn't I read this first? Like, why?
Yeah.
Why couldn't I have grasped some of this stuff 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago? You know, why couldn't I have read JC's book before I started my last one?
But I'm gonna read yours before I publish the sequel of the invention. I promise.
Well, yeah, and I'm working on my own. So yeah, we're
So we are competing, by the way, the first of us two who's going to publish the sequel of our books.
Oh my goodness, this is
Right.
great.
But mine's going to be distributed on the Pony Express. And
I can't match that.
we're going to ride out at dawn and and that's likely because they're going to dismantle the postal service in the United States. So we'll have the Pony will be our only resource. No, but I think it is. It's you mentioned Deleuze before, other people, like, just sometimes we start to appreciate thinkers by how they're handled by others. I mean, anybody listening carefully to everything I just said about Gramsci and Castro Gómez will hear very Deleuzian language in there, which is intentional, because but I too have been shy about like citing Deleuze and unpacking Deleuze. It's a tough nut to crack, and continuing to just read across the disciplines, or to read with a sort of playful indisciplinarity to it all, I think it's what I started today's live stream. I was going to call it a meeting. It's not that formal. And I started that by talking about like keeping thought lively, and my thought is kept lively by reading James Baldwin and Zadie Smith and fiction. Right now I'm ping-ponging between Proust and Sally Rooney, while reading Deleuze and Frederick Jameson at the same time. It's just it gets more stimulating. It doesn't get less. I've never gotten to a point where I'm just like, I know this already. It's really exciting to think with others and to be stimulated by them.
But one thing I think which is important to possibly close the podcast on is that we've been citing a lot of Westerners amongst thinkers, and I think we need to be very open as well to read very inspiring people beyond the Francophone critical theory kind of heritage and the Northern American one and the British one. I think we have to open ourselves, especially for those of us who are grounded in other locations in the world. We have to read things from these particular places, and it's interesting because if you want to read stuff that are embedded within the ethos of the manifesto, for example, these are things that may not be known outside of their very own kind of cuddle. Hence the example of Salazar, for example, in the Philippines, committed to only write in Filipino, because it's by the Filipino, for the Filipino, whether there's such a thing as a Filipino kind of identity at large. But I think this is important to crack that kind of, or this kind of borders as well, to engage beyond the things that are somehow very easy to access.
Yeah, for sure. But also kind of convince others in that, over the years, there's been just like so many comments, right? It's like, oh, how come you haven't read this? Like, it was published, I don't know, whatever, in English. Like, I didn't speak English until I was 20, right? I read things in other languages, which they perhaps didn't read because it was never translated, right? So how do we kind of engage that different backgrounds, and how do we encourage people who read in other languages to share that with us, particularly when those books haven't been translated? Like that's one of the challenges. But anyhow, we can continue, like we can keep talking, right? But it's time to close this meeting, as Jay called it. This very formal meeting.
I mean, he's wearing a tie, so it's a meeting.
I mean, absolutely, right? Well, thank you so much for joining us, AJ, JC. It's always an absolute pleasure to have you on a podcast. I hope you will be back. I hope you enjoy playing with us. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for being with us today. And for those of you who are watching the live stream, thanks for joining us. I'm absolutely sure you missed our incredible sense of humor and our absolutely very serious conversations about disasters and horses. So please join us again.
And essays.
For the second episode of season 10, which will be on the 24th of March, and where we will be talking about feminism and many other things, I'm pretty sure. Thank you all so much, and see you in a few weeks. Bye.
Thank you all so much.
See you all. Bye.